Like Chelsea Manning when she leaked the collateral murder video showing helicopter gunships gunning down civilians and journalists in Iraq, that was proof that these people were indeed civilians.
Does the U.S. government do anything in a proactive manner to determine whether or not because as it stands now, the default is if you're dead, you were necessarily an enemy killed in action unless we have some type of other evidence that we're going to acknowledge, sort of, I guess, passive knowledge that you were a woman or a child. Is there anything proactive that the U.S. government does after the fact to determine that their designation of an enemy killed in action is legitimate?
We've asked the White House repeatedly for many years that very question. And, what the official position is, which they'll email, if you wrote them, they would email this exact thing to you. They basically say that we take, reports of civilian deaths very seriously. At any time there's a credible report suggesting that civilians were killed, we do a review of the incident. And so we asked them, can you make public any of these reviews? Like I was specifically asking when they killed Al-Awlaki's kid, the 16-year-old son of Anwar Al-Awlaki, and they said, "Oh no, we can't make any of that public." So we don't actually know what that process looks like. And they've killed 7 American citizens that we know of in drone strikes, but they claim that only 1 was the actual target. And when they killed Warren Weinstein, who was a USAID guy, and these 2 other people, then they sort of had to address that issue. But if they kill brown people, if they kill an Arab, a Muslim somewhere, there's not going to be any major scandal over that, and they know that.
I want to ask you about Abdul Rahman Al-Awlaki, who is the son of Anwar Al-Awlaki. The story that I have heard is that, and I guess primarily probably through reporting, the Intercept in some form or another, or people who yourself and Greenwald, is that he had left his grandparents' house to look for his father. He had gone to the region that his father was reportedly in. He was 2 weeks after his father's death. He was at a cafe with cousins of his, in a public cafe, when the strike happened. I interviewed a guest a couple of weeks ago who told me that he reportedly had a weapon and had on him, and that he was reportedly involved in some terrorist activity. Have you ever heard that reported anywhere?
Wait, who was the guest?
It was Malcolm Nance.
Malcolm. I know Malcolm, but Malcolm doesn't know what he's talking about with that. First of all, everyone in Yemen has a weapon. What does that mean? Literally, I have gone through checkpoints at rallies in Yemen where everyone's wearing these huge daggers. And they frisk you to go past it, but they don't care that you have a huge dagger there. People walk around the streets with AK-47s. But no, Abdul Rahman Al-Awlaki was not in possession of a weapon. And even if he was, so what? This is what is the point of that? But the idea that he was connected to terrorism is completely false. What I think is true, though, and what's funny for me about this is that I actually like and know and respect Malcolm a lot, but I don't know where. I would ask him where he's getting that information.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I was just like, maybe there's been new reporting that I haven't heard, because I have never read even that assertion. The only, to the extent that I'm aware of it, the only thing I've ever heard is that I can't remember which one of the Obama administration advisors said, well, his dad was a really bad guy.
Yeah, that was Robert Gibbs. Let me address that, though. I think that obviously, if this kid was looking for his dad and he thought that his dad was, sort of working with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, he would have been calling people, he would have been texting people,
of course,
he would have been trying to meet with people. So I think that because of the way that they track people with metadata, it's possible that they had determined that whoever was in possession of that phone that was calling all of these people must have been a terrorist. Now, that would probably be the most generous interpretation of why the kid got killed, but I mean, the idea that he, or the allegation that he was involved with terrorism is just ludicrous and false. I mean, I was Facebook friends with him. I know I spoke to his friends, his family. That's just I mean, it's just not true. And it's really, this is what they tried to do initially when he was killed. The CIA or someone in the intelligence community leaked that he was 21 years old, which was false. He had just turned 16. Family produced his birth certificate from Colorado. They portrayed him sort of as a mixture of a hapless tourist who had somehow just appeared in Yemen, and a terrorist sympathizer. And all of this they had to walk back later. So why he was killed, we don't know. I mean, we've asked repeatedly for the White House to declassify their review of his death, and they haven't done it.
The idea that they would have simply targeted his phone, for instance, is sort of a perfect example of what is problematic about something like this, isn't it? Is that you can be not involved with terrorists and still call people who might be, and that in and of itself is not really, I think, at least morally, and I want to talk about the sort of the legality of this, but morally is not a legitimate reason to kill somebody.
Right. I mean, and I'm not saying that I know that is what happened in that case. I'm saying that is a very solid possibility that, there were a number of people that he was with, who maybe had information or had been in possession of information about his father's whereabouts, etc. And so when they then start putting into their system all of the different SIM cards and other selectors, identifiers, and they realize, oh, here's 6 people sitting together in this same place, all of whom have been in contact with this person, this person, and this person from Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and they're military-aged males, they may say, well, it's safe to assume these are terrorists and we're going to take them out. I don't know that that's what happened, but I think that's one of the most likely scenarios. I think it's more likely than, oh, let's kill a teenager because he's Al-Awlaki's kid. But we don't know. But it'd be amazing if the Obama administration would actually be the most transparent administration in history and just tell the truth on this stuff.
All right, so let's talk about the sort of the history and the evolution of this, because in some respects, I mean, this is the role of the U.S. in terms of assassinations has it seems to me we've always been doing this, but the Obama administration has what they've done, and I think Charlie Savage has written on this pretty well, it seems to me, has institutionalized this in a way, but it's fascinating how we got to this point. Just talk a little bit about when the first sort of, I guess, public the public, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a law, the guideline that we shouldn't assassinate people started with Ford, right?
Well, yeah. So you remember that in the 1950s when the CIA, first hit the scene in an official capacity, on the global scene, there was this series of coups and political assassinations, the overthrow of Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala, the overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran, then you had the funding of death squads and juntas and et cetera, and then you had inside the United States there were also this spate of assassinations of political figures, the Kennedy brothers and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and on and on and on, and Congress began then investigating political assassinations, primarily focused on the sort of international activities of the Central Intelligence Agency, and what happened as a result of those hearings is that Gerald Ford, when he was president, needed to do something to sort of placate Congress, and instead of actually sponsoring a bill that could be signed into law, Ford implemented an executive order that said that the United States does not engage in political assassination. And remember, Cheney and Rumsfeld were 2 of the most important people in the Ford White House. Rumsfeld was the youngest defense secretary and the oldest defense secretary in U.S. history. But he was, these guys were obsessed with the unitary executive, with the idea that the executive branch of government is a dictatorship when it comes to setting national security policy, and that Congress only has a role of funding it, and the Supreme Court only has a role of staying out of it. So the executive order allowed them to say, oh, well, we don't assassinate people, but it also was not a law. And every president since Ford, including Obama, has upheld some version of that executive order. Carter amended it and took out the word political and just had it say we don't engage in assassination. Carter also added and agents and representatives of the United States can't do it either. But Congress has, it's not just that Congress never really thought, oh well, maybe we should do this. They've actually avoided in an intentional way ever defining the term assassination or translating that executive order into law, because then they would have to actually define what assassination is and examine, when Reagan tried to kill Gaddafi in '86, if it wasn't an assassination, what was it? When Bill Clinton tried to kill Saddam Hussein, what was it if it's not assassination? And then all of these drone strikes. So, we basically live in an environment with this stuff where, the constitutional law professor Obama is part of the exact same cover-up of, and it's a public cover-up though, of the fact that the United States does assassinate people, but they've figured out different terms to use to sort of misdirect basically. Ooh, look at this shiny object over here, and right. That's what they've been doing for quite some time.
So people need to understand that for all intents and purposes, and probably this was also the motivation, by making an executive order as opposed to forcing Congress to make this statutory. In some ways, what Ford was doing was just simply short-circuiting the process, because if the executive can make the order, the executive can certainly break the order, and doesn't necessarily is under no obligation, really. I mean, I think statutorily, and this stuff is stuff where you get into that murky area of none of this has been adjudicated. There's no real law in this arena, where once they make it the executive order, they can certainly, somebody at the OLC of the Department of Justice can write a memo saying like, oh, when you issue an executive order, you don't have to publicly say that you've rescinded it or exempted yourself at certain times from it, because it's
right. Well, that actually is what's happened with various executive orders, over time. What's interesting is that when Clinton was in office, Richard Clark at the end of his time in office was the counterterrorism czar, and Clark, said that that the lawyers in the Clinton administration were so concerned that if they did in fact, intentionally kill Osama bin Laden, that it would be a violation of the executive order, and they were concerned about the personnel that carried out that assassination of being hauled in front of a court somewhere because of a violation of international law. I mean, now in the post 9/11 world, none of that, nobody thinks about the international law or anything. But just interesting to note that Clinton's lawyers really were concerned that they were going to be in violation of a law if they killed Osama bin Laden. And you compare that to now, when it's just taken as a legitimate part of our society that we just bump people off around the world whenever we want, wherever we want. It's a pretty huge leap from a time when lawyers would be like, well, maybe we shouldn't do this.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that, because the foreword of the book is written by Edward Snowden, and he talks about the importance of whistleblowers, and I feel like And just the entire project of making the public aware about this. I mean, I know that from the perspective of a journalist, and that it really is not prominent in your calculation, or shouldn't be, or you believe that it shouldn't be, but the public doesn't seem to be terribly, broadly speaking, to be terribly upset about this stuff.
No, not at all. I mean, we've been groomed to sort of just accept that this stuff is necessary to keep us safe. And, Obama really has elevated the support of liberals for these kinds of policies throughout his 2 terms in office. I mean, it's going to be one of the most enduring legacies of his presidency, is that he taught liberals how to love Dick Cheney's policies, or Dick Cheney's ideas. I think we'll look back later and say, wow, how did we let all of this get so far? But I think most people have, most liberals sort of have felt like, it's on autopilot now because Obama's handling it. And I just wonder how many of them would like to hear the phrase or would be comfortable with the phrase President Trump's kill list,
Right.
because I don't think they would be. But it's not just about that. I mean, I do think that there's a huge partisan component to the support for all of this stuff. But also it's just that we've now been in a permanent state of sort of having the U.S. at war everywhere around the world. I think a lot of people are just sick of it. But also they're struggling. I mean, the working people in this country, poor people in this country, most people don't have time to pay attention to this stuff. They're trying to keep their families afloat, and so I mean, I think it's a combination of factors. But it's not just the secrecy. It's also that people are beaten down from sort of being in this state of war for so long.
To what extent do you think that the calculation is, at least we're not engaging in and this is, I think, a segue into sort of the question of the efficacy of this, and the obvious answer to the question of, like, would you rather a ground war where hundreds of thousands of innocents are killed, is why do we have to have why is it just a binary choice? But between
that's like me saying to you, right? I mean, but that's like me saying to you, Sam, would you like a cookie or do you want me to hammer your head? I mean, it's just like it's not one or the other. I mean, it's like crazy. They don't have anything to do with one another. But also, the U.S. Obama does have troops on the ground. He did surge in Afghanistan. He did engage in the exact kind of policy. I mean, so it's not even true. And you look now in Syria and Iraq, they have an expanding number of special operations forces. Having 250 special ops guys, that's like having several thousand conventional soldiers in terms of the money, the expertise, the lethality, all of that stuff. I mean, they are doing that. I mean, it's not even a fair question. It's trickery. It's not real when they say, well, what do you want? Ground troops? No, that's not what you would be doing if you weren't doing drones.
Well, I mean, so what do you think? I mean, I know that you at one point were contacted by Michael Flynn. Tell us about him and tell us about his assessment of these drone wars in terms of the efficacy and relative to what the stated goal is. I mean, that's the thing that you start getting into, like, what's going on here? If there isn't sort of widespread belief that this is effective.
Right. And also, Sam, because I'm tethered to a landline right now where I'm speaking to you, and I'm going to be late for my plane if I don't leave in a few minutes.
Sorry.
But let me answer your question. So Flynn was sort of a legendary figure. He was the chief of intelligence for the Joint Special Operations Command when General Stanley McChrystal was running it. And that's really when the sort of leash was destroyed for these guys, and they were able to run wild around the world, bumping people off. But Flynn is a very sort of hawkish advocate for special operations warfare. But what he said when we interviewed him was that the drone program is counterintuitive to our goal of trying to defeat terrorism, because we don't interrogate anybody anymore. We don't capture them on the battlefield. And so what his argument is not a moral one that we're going to create blowback, although he does acknowledge that. It's more that he's saying, he's accusing Obama of killing people to avoid having to stick them somewhere, like Guantanamo or a secret prison or anything else. And I think that you have this bizarre moment where Code Pink and General Flynn somehow have reached the same conclusion on the drone wars, but for very different reasons. And I think that when people are saying, oh, the military would never obey Trump's orders to torture and do all of this stuff, that is so naive and short-sighted for people to believe that. Of course, there are significant chunks of the military that are Christian supremacist radicals and people that want the torture brought back. They love Guantanamo. They want the secret prisons back. And so there's a political dynamic to this where they're sort of saying the truth about certain aspects of Obama's policies, but for their own reasons. And so the public sort of is the beneficiary of these like internal wars, because some of the truth actually seeps out.
All right. Well, Jeremy, I'll let you go so that you can catch a plane, but maybe we can catch up with you because I wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of this being sort of embedded and sort of basically a deep state issue for our government in many respects. Because from Bernie Sanders, like you say, through Donald Trump, and of course through Hillary Clinton. There doesn't seem to be, even Gary Johnson at one point in the last time he ran, nobody seems to have a problem with this as a policy, at least as it exists now. And
look, man, I'm back in town next week. Back in New York. We should catch up and talk about the elections in the context of this.
All right, let's do that. Jeremy Scahill,
right, awesome.
Thanks so much. We will link to the Assassination Complex. Really appreciate your time.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.